Iran has been invaded at least
Just
3
paint the
times, with
whole
the most
map
notable
red.
example being the joint Anglo.
Namaste. Today we are going to watch every country England has invaded. And this is a very interesting video that has been sent to us because I always thought of the same, that how could England just like go on invading all those countries. Like with India it was like we were so much divided into princely states and all, so it was very hard to bring us together. So that is why it was easier for British to like invade us, and they did it with trade, like how like they spread trade and like started to colonize us slowly and steadily and like took over the whole of the country. So that's how it was. But what about all the other countries? Because I think so they were much more united than India, and even then they were easily defeated by the Britishers and England. So how did that happen, and how did they fought? Because we know that USA fought very well and they threw them out, and after which they had a very good time, and now they are very big country. So let's see what is there in this video.
And I do believe that yes, Britishers has brought modernization in India, but also they took a lot of things from India basically. And I used to believe that they, put basically slavery in India. But we in the previous video we also got to know that they were the one who basically finished the slavery. But that two topics are literally, that topic is so confusing for me. On the one side they just ended the slavery, on the other side they brought slavery into India. So I don't know what that matter is. But yeah, it sucks. Our literally our when we learned about our histories, it sucks to know that how Britisher looted us, and how they did things. Basically they took everything from the Indian. And I have watched a video where they showed a British museum which is in the England. And they took everything. Basically it's not just from the India, but from each and every country of the world. They took trade, they took everything. And basically they took everything from each state of the India. From they took Tipu Sultan's sword, they took a lot of things basically. Sculptures, beautiful sculptures, and a lot Kohinoor diamond. So yeah, it felt so bad that they how they looted us. So that's the reason I'm so much excited to watch this video. So yeah, let's watch the video.
Yes, and with this only, like we were seeing the comments in previous videos where people are telling that okay, not all of them were looted. Some of them were gifted to us by the kings of
No.
that kind of time, and this and that. Yeah, there are many things that we don't know about that point of time. Okay, they might be, and of course, if you are colonizing someone, that there has to be some or the other thing that you are doing bad to that country. So we will see what is there in this video. So let's start.
For a good chunk of the past few centuries, this music was the final boss music played for people across the entire world. The English and later the British have been responsible for invading and conquering more countries and people than any other nation in human history.
Oh.
And honestly, it's startling just how many places they've been to. In this video, I'm going to do my best at attempting to visualize all of Britain's invasions and conquests for you, continent by continent, in as brief a time as possible. So let's begin with the closest continent to Britain, Europe. Ireland was the first target of British conquest and was invaded as early as 1169. Within 400 years of gradual conquests, the entire island was ruled by the British and remained that way until most of it was granted independence in 1921. Historically, France has probably been invaded by the English more times than any other country in the world. Just take a look at this huge list of invasions. There's not even enough time to talk about a third of these, and for a time, all of this territory inside of modern France was directly controlled by the English, with Calais being the final piece that fell in 1557. Well, except for that time when the British took over Corsica for a couple years. The British continue to invade Spain by the millions every winter, but in the past, they've come with a lot less friendly intentions. English and later British soldiers invaded under the Black Prince in 1367 and continued on through the first, second, third, and fourth raids on Cadiz and that time when the British took over Gibraltar and Minorca. They gave Minorca back, but decided on keeping Gibraltar forever. In recent history, the British have invaded Belgium in order to support the Belgians. But that wasn't always the case. They conducted two pretty large-scale invasions of modern-day Belgium in 1654 and again in 1701. and Flanders itself was ruled by the English for a few years in the 14th century. The Netherlands was one of England's historical arch rivals, and so there's been plenty of invasions going in this direction across the 17th and 18th centuries.
Wow.
In 1940, the British technically invaded and took over Iceland peacefully for a year in order to prevent it from falling into the hands of the Germans. But this was heavily protested by the Icelandic government at the time, so in my books it still counts as an invasion. Italy, of course, was invaded by the British Army during the Second World War as well in 1943, but there were plenty of invasions before then, dating back to Richard the Lionheart's invasion in 1190. Germany, too, was obviously invaded by the British Army in 1945, and northwestern Germany was occupied by the British for 3 years until 1948. But a lot of German territory was ruled by Britain long before then. The islands of Heligoland were British for most of the 19th century, and the Kingdom of Hanover was effectively ruled under a personal union for over a century
so
between
strong.
1714 and 1837. Austria was also invaded in 1945, and the southwest of the country was occupied for a decade. Norway was invaded in 1810 and 1812 during the Napoleonic Wars when it was a part of Denmark-Norway because Denmark was aligned to France, so obviously Denmark was invaded during that time as well. Finland, Estonia, and Latvia were all briefly invaded by small units during the Crimean War against Russia because they were all part of the Russian Empire at the time, and of course, Russia itself was invaded then too, as well as in 1918 when the British took over a large chunk of northern Russia for a time in their fight against the Bolsheviks. The territory of modern Ukraine was invaded by British army units during the Crimean War. The British took over the Croatian island of Vis between 1807 and 1814 during their fight against Napoleon. The British army had boots and guns on the ground in Bosnia recently between 1992 and 95 fighting against the Bosnian Serbs, and around the same time the RAF also carried out bombing strikes against Serbian Serb targets in Serbia in 1999. Montenegro was briefly blockaded and invaded in 1913 during the First Balkan War. The British owned the westernmost Ionian islands of Greece between 1815 and 1863 before they gave them back, while Bulgaria was invaded and almost entirely occupied by the British Army between 1918 and 1919 at the end of World War I. Cyprus was a British protectorate between 1878 and 1914 when they decided to just outright annex it to piss off the Turks, and it remained annexed until 1960, except for 2 small chunks that are still British today. Turkey itself was massively invaded by the British during World War I, and part of it was occupied between 1919 and 1923. That wraps up Europe, so let's move on to Asia next. Modern-day Israel and Palestine, as well as Jordan, were British-controlled from the end of World War I to 1948 and 1946, respectively. Lebanon and Syria were both occupied from the Vichy French government briefly during World War II. Iraq was ruled between 1919 and 1932 and invaded again during the Second World War, and again in 1991, and again in 2003. Kuwait was a colony for over 60 years until 1966. Georgia and Azerbaijan were both invaded and occupied right at the end of World War I for a year. Iran has been invaded at least 3 times, with the most notable example being the joint Anglo-Soviet invasion of 1941. Turkmenistan was invaded in 1918 to prevent Bolshevik influence from spreading any further. Afghanistan is a favorite British invasion spot since it's been invaded in 1839, 1878, 1918, and again in 2001. Qatar, Bahrain, the United Arab Emirates, and Oman were all controlled by the British until the early 1970s, while a chunk of Yemen was controlled for over a century between 1839 and 1967. India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and Sri Lanka were all, of course, invaded many times and outright ruled by the British Empire in parts for nearly 2 centuries between 1757 and 1947. Nepal was invaded in 1814 but never successfully conquered. Bhutan was invaded in 1772 and again in 1864 and was sort of conquered as a protectorate between 1910 and 1948. Burma/Myanmar was invaded in 1826 and was definitely successfully conquered and ruled through 1947. Thailand was briefly invaded in 1945 since they were allied to Japan in World War II, and so was Vietnam in the same year, but that was to support the French government against the growing independence movement. Malaysia and Singapore were each conquered and ruled up until the 1950s and 1960s. Brunei was conquered and ruled up until the 1980s, whereas the Philippines were briefly invaded during the 7 Years' War. China got invaded a lot, and Hong Kong was a colony until as recently as 1997. And while not outright invaded, part of Japan was occupied following World War II
Thailand,
between
Myanmar,
1946
Bangladesh,
and
Bhutan, India,
1952.
Nepal,
And finally,
Sri
Indonesia
Lanka,
was invaded a bunch during the Napoleonic Wars
Indonesia,
since it was a Dutch
Brunei,
colony aligned to
Malaysia,
France at the
Singapore.
time.
My
Next up,
God, it's
Oceania.
insane.
Australia
Crazy.
and New Zealand, of course, were invaded
Australia
by
and
the
New
British
Zealand
and established
also.
as colonies that each gained independence in 1931. Papua New Guinea was also a British colony for a time, as were the island countries of Fiji, Kiribati, the Solomon Islands, Tuvalu, and Vanuatu. Let's move back over to Africa next, which the British have violently visited a lot.
Everywhere
In terms
they
of
have
just
violently
places the
visited.
British outright colonized after invasions, there's the Gambia, Sierra Leone, Ghana, Nigeria, Egypt, Sudan, South Sudan, Uganda, Kenya, Tanzania, Zambia, Malawi, Zimbabwe, Botswana, Namibia,
my
and South
God.
Africa, along with parts of modern-day Somalia and Guinea. Senegal was briefly invaded and had some of their coastline taken over in the 1700s, while during the Second World War, the British invaded the French colonies of Djibouti, Madagascar, and Comoros after they aligned themselves with the Nazi Vichy regime, and the Italian colonies of Libya, Eritrea, and Ethiopia, although they had also invaded Ethiopia much earlier in 1868. And
How
as German
much
colonies
power
right
did
before
they
World
have?
War I, the British also invaded Togo and Cameroon without annexing them afterwards. For the final area of the world left to discuss, let's move over to the Americas. All of Canada was a British colony until
Even
1931,
America
while
was.
Newfoundland remained until 1949. The United States, of course, was a colony until 1776, and was invaded again in 1812, and the modern states of Oregon and
Basically,
Washington
the
were
whole
claimed
world
right up
was
until
under the
1846. As far as other outright British colonies here go, there was the Bahamas, Jamaica, Belize, Grenada, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Barbados, St. Lucia, Dominica, Antigua and Barbuda, St. Kitts and Nevis, Trinidad and Tobago, and Guyana. Besides colonies, Cuba was invaded and occupied during the Seven Years' War in 1762. Haiti was invaded in 1793 during the French Revolutionary Wars. The Dominican Republic was invaded way
knew
back in
that they
1655
invaded a
in an
lot of
attempt at
countries, but this
conquest
is
under Oliver Cromwell. Parts of the east
staggering,
coast of Honduras
horrifying.
and Nicaragua were conquered and ruled for nearly 2 centuries until 1819. They sent the Navy to invade Mexico in 1861 to force them to repay some debts, and during the splendidly named War of Jenkins Year, aka the more lame-sounding War of the Austrian Succession, the British invaded a lot of Spain's colonies, including Panama, a huge one into Colombia, and ultimately Peru. In 1796, the British took over Suriname because it was a Dutch colony, and they were allied with the revolutionary French and later Napoleon. They also invaded Martinique and Guadeloupe because they actually were French during the Napoleonic Wars. Venezuela was invaded in 1902 as part of the so-called Venezuela crisis to force the country to repay some debts they had defaulted on, kind of like Mexico, while Argentina and Uruguay were both invaded during the Napoleonic Wars as well in 1806 when Spain and her colonies were
powerful
still
they
allied
were.
with Napoleon. And that pretty much sums up all of the territory the British have ever ruled and all of the countries
Like the
this
whole
small
world.
island has ever invaded. There are a total of 65 countries today who celebrate their independence days from the British Empire.
My
The
God.
empire used to rule over a quarter of all the world's land at the same time and was the biggest empire in human history. And in total, today, there have been 117 modern countries that have been aggressively invaded by the British armed forces during some point in their histories, representing a total of 60% of all the world's nations,
Wow.
which is almost the same number of countries that you can watch this video in.
Oh my god, this video literally is blown up my mind, and when I was watching this video, I was like, how powerful the Britishers were. It's not like that they, controlled India only. They just ruled on the India only. No, it's not like that. They basically ruled on the world. There were only 2 to 5, maybe there were only 15 to 20 countries who they didn't ruled. Otherwise they ruled America, they ruled Australia, they ruled Singapore, India, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, Ireland. Oh my god, when they said that they ruled the island on 1100s, I was shocked. That I was like, that how could they rule the island on 1100s, and they came India on around 1800s, right? So basically they also control India for like 100 to 150 years also. So there were a lot of countries who basically Britishers controlled for 100 or 200 years, and they also looted these countries, and that that's the reason why England was so rich country, and because obviously they looted everyone, they have everything from the world. And I'm thinking that if we go to the museum of the England, then you can see anything, everything of the world, basically every culture of the world. Because on that museum there is not the things of the stuff of the India also. They have Pakistan. So they they when they used to rule this country, they also took their stuff to their country only. So that's crazy, that's totally insane. And after watching this video I am seriously shocked, and I will not get over from this video from maybe 2 or 3 years.
Yes, actually, the thing is, like, so much information was given in this video, and it was very, like, I had all the moments of my emotions in this video. At first, I was laughing, I was enjoying that, okay, that Britishers did this, did that, but in the moment, then after I realized what was happening, then I was getting sad, then angry, then I was so grieved by it that how come Britishers had all the countries in the world under them. There were many countries there that were not even marked because they were like, they invaded them but they did not colonize them, or they did not do this and that. So now I just remember that Al-Murray's video, and I was like, okay, Al-Murray was right, because he was like, name a country and we have won a war against them, and that he's right, because they have won a war against everybody, because they have fought against everybody or anybody. Because when you are against the world, you can do it. And when you see the size of the country that Britain is, or UK is, or England is, it is so small, and all the other big countries were conquered by it because of the brains or because of the smart tactics of, you can say, England. And that's how they did it, and they ruled over India for about 200 years. So all these countries, and they extracted most out of it. So I think so it was, if you ask most of the people in England, they will say that it was helpful for all the countries that they colonized, because it helped them bring down democracy, it helped them bring together. And it can be accepted in some parts, because yes, because India was divided into so many princely states, then we would have a problem in uniting each other. So we don't know what could have happened at that point of time. But also, it also means that our so much resources was taken out, and like so much things were taken out, and so much, like, every manpower, resources, and all the things that we could have used, and we were left at a very, very grim position at some point of time. What are your views about it? Do let us know, because like now we see that, okay, Britain, like UK is in a very struggling state as far as economy is concerned. I know it is temporary only, but yeah, it is in a struggling state. So the things are changing and the world is changing. What will happen, we don't know. But at that point of time, or you can say that 4 or 5 centuries was just Britain all along. They could just rule anyone, they could just take out anyone. That's how strong they were. So what do you guys think about this video? Do let us know in the comment section below. So do like, share, and
Subscribe.
bye.
Bye.